Hello, my name's Gavin, this is Genre Books, and it's still July, it's still Rocket Summer. Rocket Summer is a reading event created by Michael K. Vaughan, where we are reading classic, vintage science fiction from the dawn of time up until 1969. There are a number of co-hosts producing great content for the event, all of which I will link below. But I have a bone to pick with Rocket Summer. It's giving me too many ideas. Having read such a sweep of science fiction in such a short amount of time, I'm noticing some of the themes more. There's themes that I've known have been there in science fiction, but I think they're becoming a little more crystallized, and it's giving me far too many ideas of things I'm going to want to do, want to read, how I want to read some science fiction in the future. And that's annoying because I already had some ideas and I think these might be supplanting them. But one theme which I think has come and gone is the idea of the Superman in science fiction. The superhero obviously still exists and has a lot more money thrown at it these days than it ever has before. But the superhero, the peak individual, the supernormal individual, these are themes that had a brief phase in science fiction, probably no more than 30 odd years, with a couple of outliers at either side. And it made me think about how the idea of the superhero or the Superman arose, and also why it disappeared. This is going to be a bit rambly, but these are my notes. They amounted to no more than a doodle, so you may just have to bear with me as I piece this together on the fly. There are different types of Superman, all of which seem to have their first beginnings in science fiction literature. But for a working definition that we can start with, I want to look at the prologue or the foreword of The New Adam, which was a book I read for the first week of Rocket Summer. This is a posthumous novel from Stanley G Weinbaum, a fantastic science fiction writer who died far too early. In the prologue, he says, "Superman is not a man, not a creature of the species Homo sapiens. This is the fallacy of Nietzsche, the fallacy of H.G. Wells. These, like others who deal with the matter, have believed that a man, a human being, raised to the nth degree, represents the Superman. Nietzsche picked one set of qualities, those of fitness, potency, power. Wells chose another set, the contemplative, the serene, the intellectual. So probably a Neanderthaler in his filthy cave, using his embryonic imagination, might have pictured his Superman as a giant in strength and size, a mighty hunter whose meat pot and belly is never empty. Certainly he never considered a race whose very thoughts were partly beyond his conception, and he saw nothing ironical in freezing to death upon a ledge of coal. As we are to the caveman, Superman must be to us. His coming is surely a possibility. Perhaps it is inevitable." Well, thankfully we're still waiting, but it gives us a great jumping off point. The type of Superman that Weinbaum posits in The New Adam is one who is born. He is a mutant, he is a freak. Edmund Hall, the protagonist, hero is a little bit of a stretch, but he's the protagonist of The New Adam. He suspects that he's somewhat different. He excels at school. And it's at school, in class, when his attention is distracted by an automobile accident that's happened outside. The things come to a head. He's reprimanded by his teacher, who says, what have I just been saying? And Edmund reels back verbatim what has just been said. The teacher's a little bit put out by this because it's sort of undermined their intended chastisement, but they persevere and say that, just don't pay attention to what's going on outside. Nobody can pay attention to two things at once. And that's the lightning bolt moment for Edmund, because he can. He always has done. And he now just realises nobody else can. Some of his powers are self-explanatory, and that is that he can do two things at once. So he could be listening to a lecture and reading a book and taking in both streams of information as we would do with one. In fact, better than we would do with one, because he has total recall when he really wants to concentrate on something, and where he can actually attain genius is by harnessing the power of both of his minds or both of his brains to deal with a particular problem. And he can solve problems very easily. Once he leaves college, this allows him to become an inventor. So he invents some new sort of electrical component, patents it, has financial security, which allows him to do further research into other things. And he's always looking to sort of satisfy that itch, that urge to understand more. He has enough humanity. For example, he applies his intellect to splitting the atom. Realises, and this is published in 1934, so 10 years before the atom is actually split, he realises what a devastating weapon this is going to be, and discontinues the experiments, destroys all the evidence, gets rid of his notes, ensures that no one else is going to be able to do this, on the assumption that no one's going to figure out how to split the atom in the future. Whether this is sort of regard for his own well-being or regard for his fellow man, I'm not entirely sure. But it does seem to be the extent of his humanity. He can't deal with people except where he is able to coerce them using the power of his mind. This is where his powers become a little more nebulous. He is not a prepossessing person. He has a slight physical, I'm not going to say deformity, but a slight physical difference in that his fingers have an additional knuckle. And this allows him greater facility in handling tools and what have you. I'm not going to say it's a superpower, but it's certainly the other thing that sets him apart from normal people. But the nebulous part of his powers is the sort of the coercion he's able to exert upon people. And basically, he wants to fall in love. I don't think he's really capable of love as we understand it. And he's a very difficult person to love. But I'm not sure quite how this power manifests itself. I'm not sure if this is his sort of deep psychology or a little bit of hypnosis. But he essentially gets someone, a woman that he went to school with, to fall for him. It's a destructive relationship. They are sort of two unequal. However, at the same time, Edmund finds another person, a woman who is like him. They have a child because he feels that there must be, he needs to be able to sort of perpetuate his new race but he can't be in a relationship with this woman. And although they should be far more compatible, I think Edmund can't handle a relationship where he isn't top billing. She is as emotionally unexpressive as he is, so their relationship is destructive too. So he's the prime example of this sort of cognitive Superman and the struggles that they have. Two other examples. Briefly, I'll mention Victor Stott, The Hampdenshire Wonder by JD Beresford, purely because I always mention The Hampdenshire Wonder on my videos. I've done a whole video about that book, so I might link that here at the end of this one. So I won't go on too much about it, but he is a super intelligent child who physically different because he has an enlarged head. It's making him look even weaker proportionately. And he has nascent telepathic coercive abilities as well, which don't quite come to fruition, but are certainly sort of there. And a book which had taken a great deal of influence from the Hampdenshire Wonder, and that is Olaf Stapledon's Odd John. John Wainwright, I think this is written a year after Weinbaum's New Adam, but John Wainwright has the super intelligence of Victor Stott. He has the coercive, telepathic, mind-controlling powers of Stott and Edmund Hall, but he is a little bit more sociable. He's not sociable with people around him, but he seeks his own kind out, and it turns out that there are many people being born with similar abilities who are certainly on the same sort of level as John Wainwright. Telekinesis, telepathic abilities, the ability to conduct psionic attacks. There is even one character who they contact telepathically, who it turns out has managed to cheat death. They actually died a few years ago, but their consciousness is still around, having conversations with people. Wainwright he is the prime mover of a group that he starts. He removes himself to an island in the middle of the ocean. He goes sailing around the world to pick up these other people with these special abilities, and they try to sequester themselves away from the rest of the world. The rest of the world discovers this, doesn't like this, things come to a head. Odd John has many more powers than Edmund Hall, so he's able to defend himself, defend his people. He doesn't want to, but he's forced into that position, and if things don't end well. But mutants, this is something that does come up later in obviously the comic books. For science fiction, it's slightly darker because these books, early as they are now seen through the lens of our knowledge about how all this can be misapplied. The underlying thought behind all of this is one of eugenics. There is always, the idea of, this is going to be the new race, improved. Eugenics was an idea which started off, I think, with some good intentions, however misguided. And in certain ways, you can see why. This was coming out of the Victorian era, where disease was rampant. If you had people who were more resistant, if you had people who were healthier, This was going to be good for the people. The problem is where this gets misapplied and people have essentially the wrong ideas about what's desirable, and the ultimate application of that being obviously the thought of having an Aryan race of the Übermensch. Massive simplification there, but I think this is the crux of the idea of why the mutant, the bred superhero falls out of favour in literature. It's difficult to make the argument of sort of selection in that way when the reality of the bastardized application of this was so much darker. The science fiction stories look at this as something that's hopeful, perhaps a doomed hope, but with ultimately a positive idea behind it. The other major type of Superman is the one who is created. But before I talk about that, there is one who sort of straddles both, and this is Philip Wylie's Gladiator. Our protagonist, our hero, is born with his powers. He comes into them as he grows up, but they are evident from when he's a baby. He has super strength. He's quite intelligent as well, but he is much more of the physical embodiment of something much stronger and above normal men. His story actually is used a lot by the early Superman origin stories. His experiences in college, trying to keep a secret identity, well, not a secret identity, but trying to keep his powers under wraps, and the dangers that ensue when he does demonstrate what he can do. But he's born with these abilities because his father, who was a scientist, basically used his son as a guinea pig. He'd already demonstrated how this this special serum he gives could be used, and he creates some sort of super powerful kittens, I think, at the beginning of the book, which are, they don't know their own strength, and he has to put them down. But tries this with his son. So his son is the result of a science experiment, but he's born with his powers. So this is where he falls into this middle ground. As he grows up, he can't really fit into society. And as the book continues, he becomes more and more detached from society. He doesn't want to get involved. He can't get involved with certain things. He sees himself as perhaps a bit too much of a destructive force. And, it has quite a lot of angst about this, which again is a classic science fiction superhero trope. And there are more stories where the hero, for want of a better word, is someone who is created in a science experiment. Possibly the first of these would be the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, where he certainly doesn't become something better, you would argue, but he certainly becomes something more powerful. And you can certainly see the genesis of the Hulk there, for example. Speaking of the Hulk, Hulk obviously comes about because of an accident with gamma radiation. It's an accident with radiation that creates the hero, or the main character, rather, he's not a hero at all, of The Seeds of Life by John Taine. This is a story that was originally in the pulps in the 1930s and became bound up as a novel in the 1950s. Our main character is not the scientist, he's the scientist's assistant. He is lazy, he's a bit of a drinker, he is envious and antagonistic towards the scientist, and he goes in one night to the laboratory with the idea of destroying the experiment. Unfortunately, he exposes himself to radiation, which realistically he thinks should have killed him. Everyone thinks he has been killed, but he hasn't been killed. He's been transformed into someone who is completely different, physically different. He is, much more of a sort of impressive physical specimen than he was. His visage is different. His intellect is off the scale. As an aside, I think possibly as science fiction fans, we absolutely relate to a superpower that is mentioned in a lot of books and a lot of stories. These people can all read really fast. That's a superpower I'm insanely jealous of. He has an incomplete memory of what he was before. You certainly feel he's trying to find himself and failing, but it does all come back to him. He does remember, but he is not someone who wants to use his powers for good. It's an interesting and entertaining story, and I would recommend it to anybody. And another hero who is created, I don't think he has any special powers, but he really is sort of the peak man, and that's Doc Savage. And if you're looking for where any of the ideas for Superman came from that didn't come from Gladiator, Doc Savage is where you have to look. He has the physique, he has the intellect, but this has all been drilled into him. Like Superman, he has a fortress of solitude. Unlike Superman, he has no special powers. I've read some Doc Savage, and I'm not the biggest fan. They have made him too powerful. He is too competent. If he has an idea of how to get out of a trap, it's going to be the right idea first off. Nothing ever really seems to go wrong for him. And in fact, if it wasn't for the fact that he has an entourage of people who are far more flawed and constantly bickering, the stories would be an awful lot less entertaining. Essentially, I would be very happy to be rescued by Doc Savage. I think I would be very unhappy if he was a work colleague. But what he does have is an absolute sense of right and wrong. And where people are created superheroes, I think you often see that morality shining through. They take their responsibility, having been given powers and abilities, far more seriously and try to do good. Often with those born with the abilities, I'm not going to say they're bad, but this is how they are. This is how they've been born. They know they're different from other people. They don't have responsibility with given abilities. They've just been left them by legacy. They often seem to be almost above morality. They are. I'm not going to say that they're not immoral. Probably amoral covers it, but they seem to be operating on a morality above our puny human levels. And the third category, and this does all lead back to the old line: some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them. The thrust upon them is the third category, and these are people that are chosen. Doc Savage perhaps falls into this category because he's been chosen, but he's been chosen by his father. E. Doc Smith's Lensmen series shows people who are chosen because they are already fine upstanding citizens. The timeline of the Lensmen series is a little skew with. The first book Smith wrote didn't really mention lenses as such, but introduced us to the Triplanetary Patrol, which becomes the Galactic Patrol. These people, and humanity as a whole, are being used as pawns in an overarching battle across the universe between two old races from the beginning of time, the Arisians and the Adorians. The Arisians, they're the good guys, see something in humans and in humanity, and they decide to make a gift to a very select few of a lens which they wear on their wrist, which confers on them certain abilities, certain powers of communication initially, then of sort of protection, I think even sort of flight and projecting hard images and whatnot. Basically, Smith uses it to come up with, he has a new idea for an ability. He has his Lensmen level up and achieve a level of consciousness that allows them to unlock these new abilities. And it's my firm belief that Green Lantern would not exist if the Lensmen didn't exist. I think perhaps another example of a chosen hero is only sort of half a reason, and that is the other half being the environment that he's placed in. And I'm thinking of John Carter of Mars. Now, John Carter as a character has no superhero abilities. I'm not going to say he's a completely normal man, because he's certainly heroic in his actions when he is on Earth. He is not quite a normal character. He says he can never remember being a child. He always seems to have been around 30 years old. This is never spoken of again in the Barsoom series, so I'm not quite sure what to make of that. But he has no special powers over and above any man whilst he's on Earth. But once he is transported to Mars, his physiology in the Martian environment allows him to kill with a punch and leap tall buildings in a single bound. He becomes a Superman in a Martian frame only. He's a very moral man, and his moral framework is not the same as that of the Martians. He's much more, obviously, humane. And he's not invincible either. He seems it at times, but he has just sort of got heightened powers because of where he is, not because of who he is. Again, you can see that with Superman. Superman takes from this as well. Superman only has his strength and ability to fly because the makeup of Earth versus the makeup of Krypton allows him to have superpowers. Don't think that quite explains the laser beams from the eyes, but this is because he draws his power from the sun as well. The birth of Superman, the origins of Superman are a little confusing, and as you can tell, I'm not a comic book person. I know bits, but I'm not a comic book reader. And maybe I'm not a comic book reader because comic books are the other reason that we don't have superhero stories in science fiction any longer. These stories, science fiction stories, have largely come out of the pulps. The pulps were dying off. Comics were the new thing. A number of writers jumped ship, and as the publishers were moving from pulps to comics, simply made the move along with them. A couple of weeks ago, for Rocket Summer, I did a deep dive of this issue of Thrilling Wonder Stories. The editor of this magazine is a man called Mort Weisinger, and he moved to DC Comics. So he's a big science fiction fan. He's a science fiction professional, and he's just been moved into the heart of what at the time was the biggest comic book company going. And it's from Weisinger that we get not only heroes like Hawkman, which I think was at least partly his invention, but the first superhero group with the Justice League of America. We have other writers who make the move at a later date, and probably Gardner F. Fox is the biggest example of this. But taking these science fiction writers and putting them at the heart of the comic industry, I think, is one of the big reasons that superheroes become a comic book thing. The heroes of science fiction novels become more normal. We don't have, after the pulps, we don't have the heroes like a Buck Rogers or a John Carter. In the 30s and 40s pulps, the science fiction heroes would often be seen wearing capes. Certainly the villains would have been wearing capes. From the 50s, late 40s and 50s onwards, they don't seem to be wearing the capes anymore. The capes have now been taken up by the superheroes. As the comics evolve, they take these stories of science fiction superhero origin types and run with them. So we have the Hulk, who is transformed by radiation. We have superheroes whose abilities manifest themselves for a short period of time, either under duress or by prompting. Somewhat like Jekyll and Hyde. Captain America has his super serum, like Gladiator did. The X-Men's superpowers manifest themselves when they hit adolescence, and this is seen with Odd John as well. But what the comic book does is refine and package this and sell it, like Mort Weisinger did, as a team. So the Justice League of America. So that you have Green Arrow, which is another Mort Weisinger creation. You have Hawkman, but you have the Green Lantern, who is a Lensman. You have Superman, who is Gladiator / Doc Savage. You have Batman, which, no superpowers there, but he's taken from other pulp characters. I think if you were to try and pull together a Justice League of the science fiction stories, it would be absolutely dysfunctional. So I can see why packaging it in glossy comics works better. And it's not like science fiction has a dearth of things that you can work with without relying on superhero tropes. And it's not like there's never any crossover either. But what we have lost is that trope of there being a superpower or reading really, really quickly. And I think that now only exists in the form of Steve Donahue. So Rocket Summer has me pigeonholing the stuff I'm reading into certain camps of ideas. And Rocket Summer, with its sweep of the decades in a short period of time, is allowing me to see a little more clearly the evolution of these ideas. I think at some point I want to do a deep dive into some of the other themes, but I think that the Supermen, the superheroes angle was a nice point to begin thinking about things like this, because it looks like it has a definite closed point within science fiction. It continues that theme in other mediums which I don't have to think about. There are no doubt a lot more works I'm ignoring or haven't come across yet that deal with this in science fiction. So if anyone has suggestions, recommendations, please don't hesitate to sort of leave a comment and let me know. But until next time,